All right, we are on with Hector Cano today. Long time no speak. How are you?
Yeah. JJ, how are you, man? How you been?
I'm good. I'm good. I got something a little bit special lined up for you. I don't usually do this for most people, but we just switched to indoors, so I wanted you to see this.
Look at that. Wow. I'm gonna say that's about what's that? Is that about 35 deep, 50 deep? How many is
Yeah,
it?
so what I needed your help on. The whole point of the podcast today was what order should I stack these in? I got them in color code, but I hear you were giving me grief about. I got that was amusing on my cone stacking issues. Was not only did I get them in the right colors, then everyone was giving me grief about what color went next. So at
Yeah,
least
you
that's
gotta
the
go light
step
to
one.
dark.
The step one, I got
Light
them
to
in
dark.
colors.
Light to dark. Yeah, yeah. You gotta crawl before you can walk, right? Walk before you can run. So this is awesome. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Big fan of what you're doing.
Cheers, man.
You already know that the new kind of evolving grassroots movement. You're at the head of it, and I love being on and discussing the game with
Well,
coaches and people that I absolutely respect. So thank you for having me.
yeah, no problem, man. So for everyone out there, like, because we got some people from about 3 people from England that listen to this. What
Oh, nice.
what part of Texas you from? Because I spoke to Michael a couple of weeks ago, and he was schooling me on Austin. Now
Okay.
you're from Houston, right?
No, close.
Close.
Just go 12 hours west. Yeah, other side of the state actually.
So for those of you who don't know Texas, 12 hours west is pretty close.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. No, I'm originally from El Paso, and lived in different parts of the state. And San Antonio, excuse me, San Antonio's became my second home. Both while I was active duty Air Force for a while, because I'm a retired veteran, Air Force veteran. So I had 2 stints in San Antonio. One while I was stationed there for about 7 years while I was active duty, and then after I retired from the military, I returned there for about 5 years, grad school, and that's where I was at up until about a year and a half ago. We decided to move back to El Paso just because that's where I currently have family. The majority of my family, mainly my parents, felt like we were needed, and it was the move that we kind of wanted to do at the time for my daughters as well, so they could be around their grandparents at least for a little while. It wasn't a definite
Yeah.
that we would be coming and staying here for forever, but we've been here in El Paso now, and so for those of you that don't know where El Paso is, which tends to be a lot of Americans too, not just people in England, but it's pretty much as far west as you can go in the state of Texas. It's where, from where I actually live,
So you
you
would
can
be
actually be
bordering which state?
New Mexico. New Mexico, 3 states technically. So New Mexico, and then the state of Chihuahua in Mexico. So I can be in 3 states or 2 countries in about 10, 15 minutes. Pretty interesting.
Well, we're going to get into. Wanted to start with your experience on the National Youth License, because I've heard many good things about that coaching course in the US. From I know quite a few people that have done it, not just US coaches. And since we're trying to. I know you're a high school coach and got a lot of other stuff, focusing on grassroots. What was that course like, structure wise? What did it teach you? Let's get into the National Youth Life. Does it still exist, by the way? I don't.
My understanding is it does, but it had gone through some changes, some significant changes. But my understanding, as of about, I'd say at least pre-COVID, it was still around. So the interesting part was, and it's a great question that you asked that, because so when I went through, it was technically still through US, the organizing body, I guess, to register for the course. It was an interesting setup. It was US Youth Soccer, but when we completed the course, the actual certificate, the certification, everything that we received, the license, was through US Soccer, the USSF, the US Soccer Federation. So yeah, it was interesting. So, but my understanding, and this was in 2013 when I went through it. So, so there was getting ready. We knew at the time, we were being told that US Soccer was definitely getting ready to take it over exclusively. So when exactly that happened, I don't know. And what it looks like now, obviously I would have to dive into that and and do some research. But one of the things that I mentioned about it, going back to your original question about what was it like, for me personally, it was one of the most fascinating courses that I've ever taken. And I've taken multiple courses. The only thing I haven't had a chance to really dive into has been any UEFA UEFA badges yet, which is on the horizon. But whether courses that I've taken through US Youth Soccer, the US Soccer Federation, what was the NSCAA and now United Soccer Coaches, I felt that part of the reason why the youth license, the national youth license course, was so fascinating was because it was a 5-day course. I took it in Texas it was at the University of Mary Hardin Baylor, which is in Belton, Texas, pretty much it sits between Waco and Austin. Okay. And UMHB it's a D3 school, really good athletic programs, really good facilities. But it was a 5-day course. It was an in-residence course. And, first off, one of the most fascinating pieces was in that course, it was a very, very diverse group of coaches. You had club coaches, you had high school coaches, you had college coaches, you had coaches with pro aspirations, right? Because these were coaches that were going to eventually want to go and coach at the academy level, whether it was USL or MLS. So you had coaches with D's, with C's, with A licenses, and yet they were all in the same course and it was interesting to see because, excuse me, because a lot of these, you had college coaches, and all of a sudden they had to work with, they were very much outside of their realm, very much outside of their norm, working with, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old kids. And,
because usually courses, they by nature, because they're progressive, you end up getting most people at the same level, right? At the same time. Like if you're doing your C license, you're probably about the same level as everyone else, right? But this is
correct.
This you're saying you've got a wildly different level of now. Why was there? Do you know why there were so many different kind of levels of people on that course? That seems interesting that you would have a college coach doing a course that's essentially grassroots, right?
Yeah, I think part of it was because it's grown, kind of alluding back to what you had originally stated. It had really grown during that time. I'd say from about 2010, 2011 to 2013 up to that point. It was growing in stature, a lot of it just because of the word of mouth of the quality of the course and how different it is. Part of what was very different about it was you dive into, so they would bring you out, you go through a lot of the courses, and inevitably the coaches are the players during the field sessions, right? Sometimes if you're lucky enough, you have some teams come out, where coaches can exercise their coaching points and hit on all their field sessions. But this course was very unique because we had players for every course, and it was, you were 1 minute you could be coaching 6-year-old boys, the next minute 7-year-old girls, and then you're going back to now 8-year-old boys, and all of this is being filmed too, and then so it's filmed and it's reviewed in front of the entire class. So that's another level of which I personally loved. There was great feedback, but what was so fun, amazing about the course was You're talking about an in-depth look at the physiological and the psychological difference between a 6-year-old boy and a 6-year-old girl, a 7-year-old boy, a 7-year-old girl, the maturation, and then like I said, physical and psychological differences, where they're at in their stages, what you can do training wise with them. Whereas, sometimes they're kind of more top heavy, harder for them to balance their head in terms of training exercises, what you can do with them as far as activities go. So all of that I found was absolutely fascinating.
So it was a lot heavier on, it's almost like, I always get these kind of things all mixed up with psychology and behavior. Mm-hmm. So learning more about the individual, right? Not so much necessarily about soccer technique, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, you dive into it. Obviously, I think the thing is, the way they look at it is understand what a prototypical, what is going on with maybe on average, what does the data tell us about a 6-year-old boy psychologically, and then physiologically, what can their body handle? So with that information, and of course you still have to assess your players in person. You can't, it's not just data that you can look on paper,
no,
but generally speaking.
Whole, right? Now, did you?
Right. So generally speaking. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Did you start out your coaching endeavors in Grassroots? Where did you start out, Hector?
I started in both club, working with young, like kids entering, you're right around your 8th grade freshman year, those kids that are transitioning from middle school to high school. And so I started there for a few
older
years.
Then.
Yeah. And that's its own separate conversation, right? Because you're talking about kids who are boys who naturally mature later, right? Physically and psychologically. And so the maturation process is later, but you're talking about with those kids they're transitioning from middle school to high school, and you're talking about obviously just these big growth spurts. You're talking about they're entering that that puberty stage, all kinds of things. So you have to factor that in. You have to be aware of that, because it was very normal for me to see a kid. I'd start with him one year as he was in his 8th grade year. I had him for about 2 seasons before they switched off to another coach. And by the time I was done with him, a year and a half later, 2 years later, they were 6 inches taller, 8 inches taller. Now had a deep voice versus when they first started. So
why did you start out at that age group?
At the time, just a couple of clubs that I was with, that's just kind of where I was placed. I was open to anything. But what I did notice is, going back to Grassroots, was I was kind of glad that happened, because what I got to see, particularly with the club that I was with in Colorado, I got to see that some of the absolute best coaches in that club were with the little ones at that grassroots level, at that that U6, U7, U8 level, pretty much U6 to U10. A lot of the really good coaches were there, on top of obviously coaching some of the older squads as well. But it was really good observation.
That seems like it's more of a rarity than a common occurrence in most clubs.
Yeah. I didn't realize it, at the time. I just thought that was because this was one of my very first coaching gigs. So I thought it made sense, and I thought that was the norm. It wasn't until after I left that club, and then I was coaching at the college level, and then when I started coaching at other clubs, and then of course just talking with more coaches, I started to realize that that's a good practice, that's a best practice, but it's not exercised enough.
So now you're at the college level now, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But right now, no. I mean, at that time, I transitioned from club to college. But yeah, right now, currently, as we speak, I'm at the high school level.
High school level. Okay, good. So my question I wrote down is right. So can you talk to the grassroots coaches out there about, if you had a magic wand, or if you were suddenly put in charge of grassroots coaching, right? What at maybe the different stages, what could we do better as grassroots coaches to develop better players for when they come to you? Like what are maybe in your experience, or maybe a little bit broader, you can speak on from seeing lots of high school players, what are we not doing a good enough job at? Like, what could we do so that, what would you like to see land on your, on your doorstep and go, where are we lacking? What are we not teaching, or what are we not doing a good enough job of the grassroots age, so that your job is, you can focus more on what you want to focus
on? I think, what I've come across a lot of is and my experience has been, is there's been a lot of good, I think we have a lot of great coaches all over the place, and it's all, literally across the country, not just in, I know sometimes a bigger club name can kind of carry and make it seem like, hey, this coach must be amazing because they coach for this club. But I've seen coaches, I've seen really good, really incredible coaches for some of these independent, whatever you want to call them, no name, lesser known clubs, in different pockets, different areas, the smaller markets. But what I've also come across, what my suggestion, I guess, would be, from my time when I got to coach at that the very early stages of grassroots, is my suggestion would be to more coaches, and it's what I place the biggest emphasis on, is don't coach. I don't think as a coach you can realize this, but when you're doing it, unless you're on the sidelines and you're watching someone else's, don't coach the fun and the love out of the game. I think you see it up and down. I mean, I know you're very active on Twitter. You see the horror stories everywhere of a U10 game, right, where the two coaches were shouting at each other, shouting at every player, and it's just like, how, when you're a 9-year-old, you're an 8-year-old, how can you, day in and day out, you can't tell me that doesn't have an effect. So I would say not focus on the fun, because I think the fun, the room to give them creativity to grow and foster that love of the game, that keeps them coming back. We know that. We all know that, but I think somewhere in the grind, in the day-to-day, I think some, not all, but I think some coaches lose sight of that.
Do you think it's more definitely are you talking more about the practices themselves, or are you alluding more to maybe the pressure or the environment that coaches are putting on young players? Or is it maybe also I think about this all the time as well. Is it maybe more of a structural problem where there's too much emphasis placed on, we're going to this tournament, we're paying X number of dollars, we're staying there. It's really is there a way that the structure needs to change to still provide young kids with an opportunity to go play against other teams, but in a less of a pressure cooker environment?
Correct. When that was going to be the second part that I was going to hit on, was the overly structured, I guess, mechanism, the monster that it's become now in this country. And I'm pretty sure Canada is following suit, is pretty much the same. Just to overly structured. I mean, you hear it all the time. We talk about it. It's like, we will get the talent in this country. we'll move further along when you see kids, something that resembles remotely close to what you would see in the favelas of Brazil, right? Where they're playing. It's just a bunch of kids playing out on the street, right? It's no adults getting involved to ruin things, right? It's just kids having fun, kids playing, street soccer. And I get the dynamics in this country are different, because unlike Brazil, where that's kind of the country's sport, pastime. Here, here in the U.S., you have ungodly amount of sports, right? There's multiple sports here, so
Is
I
that
get that part. But
in your? This is a question I have for you too. Like from a from your perspective, being in the US, is that the fact that we don't have Canada the same, right? Like I very rarely see what I would call a pickup game or just a bunch of kids playing. Is that similar in your experience for other sports in the US, like baseball, basketball, American football? Like, do kids just go out and play that anymore? Or is it as a whole? Do you think it's changed across society that just doesn't happen as much anymore? Or do you find it more prevalent with certain sports? I would think that it happens, that kind of free play happens more with basketball than any of the other sports. What have you seen with that?
I think my observations is, and I think you're right. I think basketball's a perfect one. You would say you're more likely to see that free play, and obviously in what would be more people, more courts in an urban setting, obviously, or but like we can say football, baseball, even soccer. I don't randomly see kids just out in parks regularly playing pickup, playing kick arounds. That is definitely not and I think somewhere there, because I know it was different when I was young, so somewhere there, I think that as a society, that's definitely transformed into kind of what we see now in terms of this massively, I guess I'll use overly structured, for lack of better words, right?
Yeah.
Just these massive, overly structured, league play, and then of course that's not enough, because then it's a matter of status, right? Of what's that word, right? That catchphrase, that elite. What's elite? What's higher level? What's going to open up my kid to experience better players and have that opportunity to be around coaches where they're gonna get seen.
I think it's kind of also stems from the pay to play movement, right? Which again, there's nothing. I'm not against pay to play at all. It's how much you pay, but I think one of the negative aspects of pay to play is that parents don't see any value anymore in that kind of activity. Like I know we as a club, we've been adding free play and just kids organized only time to sessions for the last couple of years now, and we found two things, right? Number one, parents don't value it, so you have to almost build it into the so instead of saying you can come from 6 to 6:30 and just kick around and have fun, and then your session is 6:30 to 7:30. Yeah. We've had to almost go to the point where we say your session is from 6 to 7:30. Be here, because people just don't come to that first half hour. The parents just like, well, they're not being coached. There's no value there, and really, I look at it. There's more value in that part where the kids are, experimenting. They're free to try new things without anybody telling them what to do. There's as much value in that part, but we've had to almost like disguise it for the parents. It's bizarre.
Yeah, and that's an interesting one that's a whole 5, 6, 7, 8 hour podcast in itself, right? When we start talking pay to play, because there's so many, I think we look at it in this part of the world, and we just kind of wonder, how. I think to unmask that, to peel back the layers of the onion, if you will, we kind of have to look at how did we really get here? I always hear the phrases of, well, it's pay to play is wrong. We need to change it. We need to fix it. I think on some level, somebody's going to have to pay. I think we understand that. We understand because of the infrastructure. But I think what never really gets asked is, okay, let's do a case study here. Is how did we really, if you go back, I don't know, 20 20 years, 25 years. How did we get here? How did we get to this model now, from the very earliest of stages, and how did it kind of just build this momentum, and how did we just completely transform and I guess evolve, if you want to call it that, from those pickup games and those kick arounds that you would see right before on their own, free play for kids independently, to now it's always got to be only at this time, right? Because that's one of the things that I tell my players, especially my players with college aspirations, is that, and even my own daughter, who, you know, she just turned 13, she's in 8th grade. And she's kind of beginning to get to that point where she's alluding to the fact that maybe she might want to play at the next level. And I tell her, it's like, well, I said, that's not going to come from me just because your dad's a soccer coach. I said, I have to see it from you. You have to be on your own with the ball. And, you know, and you already know this. I said, if you're only practicing at practice, I said, it's not going to be good enough, you know? And I think that's where some of our society has gone, is we have a lot of kids that are only practicing at practice, or their schedules are crammed with all kinds of stuff. Of course, right now, COVID, it's totally different. But I think that's kind of the fascinating part for me, because I start to look back and it's like, okay, how did we get here? I don't pretend to have all the answers. I just ask some of these questions as to, okay,
was there a culture of free play though back in 20 years ago when you were growing up? Was there, or is it, you know, because I hear typically, right, like from a lot of people, well, you know, like there's just no soccer culture, right? There's no soccer culture here in Canada or the US, which there isn't in the same level as other countries. But was there more of what we're talking about back when you were a kid? Like
where I grew up, you know, where I lived, yes. I'm not going to say it was everywhere. But like I said, going back to what the U.S. is about, you would see it across, and I know this because I played in it, you know, whether it was basketball, football, and soccer, really those three, primarily, of course, soccer for me, and basketball, ironically. But yeah, I mean, and like I said, unless I'm completely oblivious to it, but I just don't,
no.
I don't see it, you know, I don't see it at all anymore.
Yeah, and I think that's a big challenge for the grassroots community as a whole, is how do we, and it goes back to that, right? Like the club is being paid, and what parents value or seem to value is a coach standing there telling kids what to do, which I understand, right? It's like you're paying for lessons. That's a completely natural. I think that we have to find a way to add additional time, or find some time within what we do to create that environment, right? Because like you said, there's just other countries around the world, that's what they grow up doing. And we've eliminated that completely. Like there is no time outside of, you know, our sessions where the kids are experimenting in an environment that is judgment free from adults. And I think it's a hugely missing part of the puzzle.
Yeah, well, we've seen it to a certain extent, at least when they get in high school, right? But of course, it involves structure, organized, you know, organizations, and it involves pay. You see it in the forms of, you see it in the forms of ID camps, right? These summer ID camps, these development camps. That's really how you see it now. But yeah, you're absolutely. But I think some of it too, some of it too, you see, I guess it's maybe a trickle down effect from what you see in the school system, because even in the school systems, right, whether public or private, one of the things in this part of the world is, and there's been multiple studies about it, where you see that they're getting less and less physical activity time, less and less, you know, PE, physical education time. And you see it in some of these more, some of these better, I guess, better quality of life, or happiness. What do they call them? These gross happiness index studies in parts of the world, in Europe, some of these countries, particularly Scandinavian countries, they seem to be showing a lot better I guess, results. And some of it is because they have a significant amount of physical activity built into their day, where you're not just sitting down for 6, 7, 8 hours at a time. So I don't know. Maybe that's a stretch. I don't know, but I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I see how that could be a trickle down effect into what we're talking about here as well.
Yeah. So I want to kind of go back a couple of questions there, and we talked about what you might like to change at the grassroots level, but let me phrase that question in a little bit different manner. So the players that come to you at high school that don't make your teams, what are they lacking? Like what could we, I guess that's more my thought process is the players that don't make it. Where are they lacking, Hector?
Well, it's a bit of a broad net, but generally speaking, they just never they don't have any experience at all. They're really, and this is kind of why I go back to the fun and growing the game and the love of the game, because you'd be amazed, even in this part of the country, which is a very, very very, very much a hotbed in terms of soccer talent and the love of the game. But at least on the girls' side, it's I have a lot of girls that'll come out for the team, and they've never touched the ball. They've never touched the ball. So yeah, never played, and they're entering high school, or it's the opposite, right? Or it's I played for a year or two when I was 6, 7 years old, and then stopped. And then now that I'm in high school, I want to try it again. So, and that's usually, and I think in terms of the technical, the technical level of this sport, that can be tough on a kid, right? That can be tough on a kid. And sometimes, and at the high school level, you're going to also have kids that are sometimes they're able to overcome that to a certain extent, because they may be limited on the experience, but they're just out of this world athletes, Right. So, and that's where what I love about the high school game is, you have that, what they call that slanted slope theory, right? You have your high performers, your high experienced players, and then your novices, or you're never played or haven't played in a long time. And, bridging that gap, challenging these guys and challenging these guys. And what I love about the high school game is you're inevitably you're not going to have a squad of 18, whatever you have, 16 to 18 players on your squad that are all highly experienced. They all probably also play club. That doesn't happen at the high school level. So inevitably you're going to commit to some players with significantly less experience, and your job is to develop them technically as best as you can, as quickly as you can. But where I place a big emphasis, what I've learned in my time in high school, going back to when I was in San Antonio, is how we can also bridge that gap with some of our technically limited players, for lack of better words, is the focus on the tactical development. That's where I feel we can rapidly develop them, right? Because I've been blessed to have a lot. Yeah, I've had some players that have been technically limited, but extremely bright, extremely smart. And we start talking about the tactics, the strategy, the X's and O's, the roles and responsibilities of different positions, and based upon, independently within the formation, the groups of whether it's the defenders, the mids, and your forwards. And then the other thing is, the one that still baffles me because they don't do it enough is watch film, not just their own games, but obviously just watch the game in general, because they don't watch the game enough. And what I've found is that's a great way to rapidly, to minimize their experience level and rapidly grow, help them grow rapidly by putting an emphasis on the technical or the tactical development. Sorry.
But what you just said there kind of shocks me, because I I would have thought you would have 18 pretty good players, like very good players. Why is that not the case? Like if you're a high school and you're basically picking the best kids out the whole high school, and you're saying you still don't have 18.
Oh yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Is that because some of them still choose to play club soccer and then they can't play high school, or is it just we're not getting enough kids, like you said, like they were getting them into the game and keeping them involved in the game over a longer period of time?
Yeah, I think that, so that's a totally different question, because I think from that perspective, you're talking about that a big chunk of that completely comes down to geographic location and the actual, and the school where you are. And I'll give you an example here in Texas. So the school where I'm at East Sleda High School, they're traditionally speaking, they're definitely not known as as a power in women's soccer. They had fallen on hard times for a while now, and and last year in my first year, we had some success. We had the big thing was, I knew coming in was it was going to be a complete rebuild and a complete culture implementation. So heavy lifting on that part. But we had some success. There was either a lot of firsts or a lot of the firsts in over 10 to 15 years in that program last year. So it was something that we could build on. So you have to be realistic with, I think, your expectations once you assess what you have.
So you're not really like, your team isn't really like an elite level program then?
No, we weren't there. I think we've made significant strides. By no means am I going to say, hey, put the elite tag on us. But we're we're growing. I think obviously everybody's been hindered by COVID this year. Yeah. But I think so. Now let's just say you go look at a program in one of the top three to top five hotbeds in the nation. You go look at a women's soccer program, high school soccer program and we'll stay in Dallas, right? Such as a Highland Park, a South Lake Carroll in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. There, you're more likely to have kids that are going to be top to bottom, 16 to 18 deep, almost all club players, highly skilled, extensive experienced players. Some of them probably even playing on the same club. So it depends. It's not, and you're going to see that, and you'll see that with some.
Is that down to numbers, Hector?
Yeah, it's geographic location. It's not necessarily just the size of the school necessarily, but it's just where in certain areas, there's been almost like there's been a culture established within the high school or within the program, and then it's just kind of it feeds into it, year after year. That's kind of the power of when you build a program at the high school level, and there's continuity there with the high school. I mean, with the coach, you start to see that players want to go there, right? Players want to go there, play for that program. Kind of very similar to a high school. I mean, to a college. Sorry, to a college program. And like I said, I use Dallas because you're talking about one of the top 3 to top 5 hotbeds in the country in terms of talent. And then you see the same thing with certain programs, and I think it's also based on with the numbers. I think you're onto something in terms of the numbers in your bigger markets, right? Your Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin. You'll see it some in San Antonio, and then out of Houston, of course. So yeah, it's a kind of this interesting combination of a number of factors. It's not a single one. But that said, that doesn't mean that every single high school program in a large market such as Dallas, Fort Worth, or Houston, it doesn't mean that every one of those programs are good.
So I wanted to quiz you, get your feedback on this too. So I've kind of come across and heard that some or many, again, having not watched a ton of high school soccer, like the style of play is very direct and very physical, and relies a lot on, you know, players that are physically gifted, right? Speed, strength. What would your assessment of that be? And do you think that maybe that style, is it indicative of the players that are coming, you know, what they come to you with, and you just trying to make the best of what you've got? Do we need, you know, does that, it sounds like it'll be very hard at that age for you to really, like, it's going to take a very dedicated coach to change that style, right? And try and really work on playing a different way than it is just to take what you got and do the best you can with it. And do you think we need to change something at the grassroots level so that that's not what you're up against?
Yeah, I mean, oof, that's a great one. So it's like multiple moving parts there. But I wouldn't disagree. I would definitely not.
That was a lot of shit there.
No, it was good though. It's good. I'll try to hit on it as much as we can, and then we'll keep coming back to it because there's a lot there, but it's good. I would say I wouldn't disagree with what you said in terms of what people say or might think in terms of direct at the high school level, right? Very direct, very physical. It, to a certain extent, it kind of can look a lot like the college game. But what I would say too is I wouldn't disagree with that, but at the same time, I've seen multiple really strong, and I'm only speaking for the state of Texas here. And I've seen it some in Colorado. I didn't coach high school in Colorado, but in my time when I got to scout and watch some high school games, is you still have, that doesn't mean, it's definitely not a blanket statement in terms of every school plays like that. Can it be a physically imposing? Yeah, I think what I think is different about the high school game versus, let's just say, whether you're talking about GA, Girls Academy, what's now the MLS DA, I guess, or the ECNL girls, ECNL boys, your upper echelon leagues on the youth club side. Usually they're playing same age or maybe up a year, right? 1 year. They have these windows where they might be a combined U16, U17. High school, you got, if you have talented freshmen, you might have a 14-year-old on there going up against a 17, 18-year-old, right? So I think there has to be that level of, so I think it's kind of common. It's what you'll see to a certain extent in the college game. But I think the other piece too is what I absolutely love about the high school game is, I think one of the biggest blind spots for the club game as a whole, in youth soccer in this country, is the lack of I guess maybe because they don't have the time, but there definitely isn't enough of an emphasis on the performance side, right? On the strength and conditioning side. So, and in the high school level, you're afforded that. And especially when you got your younger ones and you're trying to not only develop them tactically and technically on the field, but off the field, making them, you want to make them superior athletes. So I think in a high school level, you're afforded that opportunity. You're afforded that time. You're afforded the opportunity to place a heavy emphasis on recovery, which is a lot of what I do. Whether it's your occasional yoga sessions, your foam rollout sessions, all of that, especially after a game, and especially because it is a grind once you're in the season. For us, you're playing your games, you're playing your district matchups Tuesdays and Fridays. And so Tuesday you'll have a match. You could be coming off of a very tough, very physical match. Wednesday, very light, watch some film, recovery. Thursday, good practice, good technical session. Fridays, very light, touch the ball for a little bit, do some walkthroughs, touch on some things, and then you're playing again Friday night. Saturday, you're usually in there again, watch film, have some breakfast, watch film, and then you're back at it again the following week. So I'm aware of that. That's kind of why I'm not a big I'm not a big proponent for tournaments in general, just because of the sheer volume of what's placed on the players in terms of the stress, the physical stress. But it's kind of one of those things that's what it's come down to now. You see a lot of these showcases now, right? And that college coaches are attending, and they're like they're over, whether it's a Labor Day weekend, a Memorial Day weekend. I know there's a big one happening right now in Dallas as well, over the post Thanksgiving weekend. So yeah, I mean, it is what it is. But I think that and speaking for my team, we're definitely not a just kick the ball and run. We're definitely not a direct team. We look to play our possession oriented, and look for the quick counter capability when we have it there, and also and a high press. So it's kind of, I guess, Hector Cano's version of a little rock and roll football, I guess, so heavy metal football, whatever you want to call it.
I mean, it's kind of a criticism I've heard of the U.S. college game, and then that trickles down to the high school. I've heard it many times that the style is just very, direct and relies on speed and physicality. And I look at it that until the grassroots level changes, unless the focus at grassroots changes, then the players coming into high school will continue to be the same. And overall, that style of play or using those type of players will still be used. And then they'll go up to the college level. So I think for me, the change has to occur at the beginning. It's not like you can't change the college game, because by the time you get to that level, winning is very important, right?
Right.
But you're going to do whatever you can to win. And then, the next level down, high school, there's probably, I think the more I speak to more high school coaches like yourself, like there's more people trying to do something different. But then if the college game hasn't changed, you're the players that you're developing and training to a certain style don't make those teams. So I think I think it's got to be back. It has to back down to the grassroots level to start developing a different type of player, and then it works its way up, right? It's not. I don't think
no doubt. Down. Right, no doubt. And I think, and that said, I think, one of my ultimate measuring sticks in terms of how do you measure, when you throw that label of quality coach, of good coach on a coach, is my measuring stick for that is how much do they get? I look at a coach, and I might lose you on this one, but I'll just give one example. Is someone like a Diego Simeone at Atleti, right? Is how much he gets out of his players, right? Regardless of style of play, I think I just use him as an example. Have they won titles and all that? No, but what I'm saying, I just use him as one example of that's how I measure a coach. It's like, okay, all right, the cupboard is half full in terms of talent, or he or she is loaded with talent, and yet they're only getting to a certain level.
Or are you squeezing everything you can out of that player?
Absolutely.
Because there's some players, I mean, we all have them, right? There's some players that just physically, that's all you're going to get from them. Like they're not going to, so, but I guess what you're saying is, can you get that out of them? That's
right. Well, and the thing is, psychologically, I think we're the best at our craft is, can you get that player to believe that? Can you get them to just overachieve and exceed beyond even what they could see themselves doing? And I think that's that's not putting it on the grassroots. That's just the reality for a lot of high school coaches is, hey, this is what I got. I'm not a club coach, and I'm not a college coach that can go and handpick what I want on my roster. So you got to go with what you got. And I can have the greatest. I can have the Pep Guardiola style of play up in here. But if I'm trying to do that with a squad of 18 players that all have two left feet, that might be a little tough. So I think it's being honest, it's being realistic.
Do
Um,
high schools as a whole, do they do much work with grassroots soccer in their community with clubs or?
here, not really. Unfortunately, I think that's been one of the biggest things that I've been here a year and a half, and in my first year, at least pre-COVID, about my first year here, I've been here a little over a year and a half actually. Um, that's what I've kind of discovered. That's what I've kind of noticed is there's a lot of disconnect. There's a lot of there seems to be, there's a lot of quality coaches. There's a lot of quality clubs. There's a lot of, but I think there could be more interaction, even just amongst the clubs. And I think there could be better organization within some of the club leagues here. And then, part of my role in what I've been attempting to do here is better community outreach from my high school program to some of the clubs in the city, because it needs to be more inclusive rather than exclusive, and a little bit less tribalism, I think. So yeah, so a long way to go here I think. But I can tell you that in San Antonio it's different. It exists there too, but it's very different from here, I guess.
Because I suppose part of your challenge or your success is how many players coming into the high school have had a soccer upbringing, right? And when you,
right,
I suppose when you factor pay to play, like there's just certain kids are just excluded from that, right? But they're not excluded from your high school. So they're coming into your high school, but they never really were included in maybe the higher levels of play, a club.
Right. And the other thing too is it can't be ignored. It has to be mentioned. I guess if you look at it across like if you look at the women's game, right? The women's game, even at the professional level, the Latin American countries, the women's game is growing rapidly, as we can see, right? And the talent level is definitely being more distributed across the world. But the Latin American countries had been behind. And I think some of it was, culturally speaking, there was less emphasis, less of a priority given, to female athletes.
Yeah, culturally, right? That's a
female side. It just wasn't right. It was less. It was encouraged significantly less, and it was no different. It was no different here, to a certain extent. I'm not going to say that that exists across the board, because it doesn't. But I will run into players who they want to play. They love playing the game, and kind of parents are kind of like, we don't know if we want you to. And it's not limited to just soccer. It's like, hey, we'd rather that you just place your emphasis on another program, on something else, or focus on your studies. And we don't really want you to play athletics, any sport. So that does exist. That has happened. And not just here. I mean, I've come across it on occasion in San Antonio, but definitely I've come across it a little bit more here. But I just use that to, I guess, point out a bigger picture of coaches have to deal with that too, and if you're seeing it in some of the biggest footballing nations in the world, such as, Argentina, because they had a lot of struggles just to get their women's program going for the last Women's World Cup. But then you have the other across the board, that broad spectrum. You have Spain, the women's Spanish program. That's probably the fastest. No one, I guess, federation, no one organization in terms of at the women's level is probably growing faster and gaining more momentum probably than Spain. So it's just an additional factor, I think, that I wanted to point out and put out there, because we have to be aware of those. I think as football people, and when we look at things across the board. And when you look at it in this country, in the U.S., when you look at it in different areas as well. But that's neither here nor there. That's not an excuse. That's just the reality. But I have a question for you: is in Canada, have you had much of a chance to? I mean, I don't know what it's like or how much it exists. High school, high school soccer there. What is it like there?
From what I've seen, and I would not deem myself an expert outside of my little world where I live. And I mean, again, I live in a fairly, rural area, but it's certainly not organized or have any emphasis anywhere near the level you're talking about. So typically the season is way shorter, to maybe a couple of months, I think. I don't think I know of a high school in our area that has a high school soccer coach. It's usually one of the teachers, right? Or, it definitely does not have what just listening to you talking about film and yoga sessions and rollout and technical sessions, and like, it is nothing like that. It very much operates like almost like a rec program. The kids come to school in September, come for tryout, 40 kids show up, right? Girls, they pick a team. They might train once or twice a week. Their season's a couple of months, and then it's done.
Yeah.
There's opportunity to, if you play in your region. If you win your region, then you go on to the like kind of provincial stuff. But
right.
It's not a full-time, year-round focus. Like you would not get a job here doing what you're doing.
Yeah. No, I think.
And that may be different. Maybe slightly more different in bigger urban areas like, Toronto and the GTA. I'm sure like there's more schools, more competition, but typically, it's not a high school sports here doesn't seem to be anywhere near the level of the US. I mean, I've been to the US a lot, to Michigan, and I've been to schools there, and I see the facilities.
Oh yeah.
Blows my mind. Like we have nothing like that here.
Yeah, and absolutely. As a country, yes, big emphasis on high school sports. I think, and when you come to this country from another country, I think and when they look at, hey, why isn't the U.S. more of a football nation, right? Why aren't they more successful? Well, we started like 40, 50 years behind everybody else, but not just that. I think you're dealing with that is that here it's very much an athletics country. So it's not just one or two sports, but I think that's interesting, because it'll bring me back to, my state, the great state of Texas, where, I think, and no disrespect to like the state of Michigan, but if you think
you're upsetting the Michigan now.
If you think high school sports is mad there, you need to come down here to Texas sometime, to where you can, it's very, very big on high school sports.
Well, I think I've heard of that show, Friday Night Lights.
Friday Night Lights, right?
Yeah. I mean, I've heard the high school sports in Texas. I mean, I haven't been to Texas yet. I'm coming to Buc-ee's, but
there you go.
I mean, the reputation is that high school sports in Texas is like a second religion, right, for some people. Football, obviously American football for sure. It's just, but in general, whether it doesn't matter whether it's like, to go based off of the example you were talking about, it doesn't matter whether it's big city, big market, or rural areas. Right. They're big, particularly obviously football and basketball, because in some of your more rural areas, you don't have soccer programs. You'll have in the state of Texas. So in the state of Texas, you have 6 classifications, right? You have 1A being your smallest and 6A being your biggest, and it's all based off of enrollment. So naturally, in the bigger cities, you're going to have the bigger schools. But only the top 3 classifications, your 6A, your 5A, and your 4A, do you see soccer right now. It's been largely spoken that it's going to eventually get down into the 3A level.
But yeah, whether it's rural or big city, high school sports is definitely very big here. Very big.
Like, how many people would go to a high school game? Like here, if we had a high school soccer game, you'd be lucky if you got 15 or 20 people going to watch it.
Yeah, here it's interesting, and you'll love this. Here, I always crack jokes, particularly here in El Paso, because I used to say that we were socially distancing before it was cool, because sometimes you'll have maybe, I don't know, 50 to 75 people in the stands for our games, but primarily because they think it's a lot of people think it's too cold, because we play in the winter here. And I don't know, it cracks me up, but no, I think it's not uncommon, especially once you get into the playoffs. You'll see games, in San Antonio, we would have crowds there sometimes, not just at my previous school, but other games that I attended. You'd have a couple thousand in there, for a high school soccer game. Obviously, high school football, those Friday night lights, and because they only play once a week, those games are always naturally going to be bigger. You're always going to have a lot more people there. But yeah, because football, I mean, without a doubt, American football is king here in Texas. But it's also very common to see here in Texas to see a lot of multi-sport athletes. Whether it's football, basketball, soccer, football, track, basketball, track. You'll see a lot of multi-sport athletes, which is good, which is really good.
Yeah, it's definitely a different high school sports, even university sports. I think just in Canada, and from back in my way experience growing up in England, like even, I mean, it's not that big. It's like, I think that's one thing that if you come from the UK and you come here and you see it in action, you are in awe of it. You're like, wow, right. Like this is like a serious endeavor.
Yeah. And, and the thing too is, and I know you've heard the discussions about the college game, about how maybe there should be less emphasis on the college game if we want to make our professionals better. So they should be going from academy ball straight to pros, whether it's in Europe or MLS or USL. But I think, it's interesting how when a lot of Europeans come here and they look at the college game, they're like, oh my God, this is what they've built in the US in terms of the college game. It's like, it's literally the world's largest amateur league. When you look at it from D1 to D2 to D3, NAIA and junior college. So I think there's a little bit of, I think that's a very brilliant assessment. And I think we can do a lot with that. You would just have to try to find a way to not, you understand what our strengths are and focus on them rather than trying to, let's not try to be what we're not as a country, So yeah, easier said than done, of course, easier said than done, but
it seems like in Canada and the US that we're trying to use a model that is not used anywhere else. And so far, the jury is out, right? Because it doesn't seem to be producing better players.
Yeah. And I think,
when so how do you has enough people in it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How do you strike that balance, right? How do you strike that balance between, okay, what, and that's why I said it's not necessarily continue to do what we're doing, but I also feel like, so in this country, I feel like there's a bit of a kind of I don't know, inferiority complex, right? And when it comes to the game, in terms of how we should be playing, how we should be developing, and it can't be just this all-encompassing blanket across the country, because the country is too big. It's too big. The country has too many people. Well, I shouldn't say too many people, but a good amount of people to where we should be producing better. We should be doing more. But I think what gets overlooked is how, because you do have these soccer mad parts of the country. You do, you really do.
I mean, just from an outside perspective, like it seems to me that one of the good things about the system is also kind of something that hinders it. So
Yeah. Yeah.
what you typically see is you have this, this benefit of getting some kind of scholarship and extra education for good players in high school, which is a great thing, right? Financial reward and academics. But that also at this time, I think, unless kids are going to like an MLS academy or something, that seems to be more of a preferred route. It's almost like this delayed talent thing, right? Like you're seeing,
Right.
you're seeing. I mean, I speak about the Premier League and England because that's pretty much, somewhat of what I know. You're seeing 17, 18, 19-year-olds starting and getting opportunities, and probably even more so down the lower leagues. Whereas it seems in the US, it's like, well, the path is you go to high school, you get your scholarship, you go play college soccer, and then you go to become a professional later. But it's like you're 23, 24 by then. That's
Right.
like you are a seasoned veteran as a top player, right? In many of the other leagues, you're a seasoned player at 20. You've already played 4 or 5 years, so it almost seems like if you could fix that if you could steer more people into the professional route and maybe
I don't know if you can steer
with the education, like then you'd really have a winner.
I don't know if you can steer more because of the numbers, but yeah, I mean, obviously have more people to have more young players to have those aspirations possibly. But yeah, it's because I think both can exist. I think you can have that. You can have the college game and you can have that because you're talking about what, that 1%, right? Whether it's MLS or in Europe, right? But just like with the US, what the perceived potential golden generation of Americans, which you're seeing right now in Europe, right?
Mm.
But like I said, I think both can exist. But I guess that's the question: is at the club level, is that what's partially, I should say, kind of maybe tearing apart or re-enhances the pay to play model because at the club level you have coaches, you have directors, you have clubs that they're searching for that 1% kid, right? So does that come at the expense of everyone else in the system, right? So again, that's the complexity of, I think, the game in this country and in Canada as well, this part of the world.
Yeah, I don't think we don't focus on developing enough of the 99%.
Correct. And which comes back to the high school question that you asked me, with more of an emphasis starting at the grassroots level, right? It's all interconnected. And again, easier said than done, but I think these are the questions that I think sometimes maybe the key people that can really immediately impact and influence change aren't asking or don't care to know, so I don't know. I think that's the other tough one.
How do we get more young kids into that 1%, or how do we make that 1% 20, 30, 40% better, right? And the only way we'll do that is by focusing on the 99%. You can't just focus on making the 1% better. Like there needs to be more competition and more opportunity across the board, and that's got to start at the younger levels. But I think it comes back to again one of the key points you said, which was as well as not coaching the fun out of the game. Like there's the best thing we can do for younger grassroots players is give them more opportunity to play and have them enjoy playing more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the latest stat, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but excuse me, some water. But correct me if I'm wrong, but the last stat that I had seen was that on average, a soccer player in this country, because here's the interesting part, is in this country, and I'm guessing Canada's very similar, is they almost all of these kids that start playing sports, they almost all start playing soccer. Isn't that interesting? They almost all start playing soccer here, but That's what I was going to say. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the last stat that I had seen is that by the age of 12, I think there's a growing percentage that stop playing the game. And it's not because, hey, I want to go play another sport. It's because, hey, I'm not having fun anymore. You know,
It's still
I'm not enjoying it anymore.
One of the things in my youth grassroots soccer experience was we played our soccer in Michigan for a few seasons just because I prefer the schedule, and the league there was very well organized. And I remember there was two teams we came across that were the most fantastic young little teams I've ever seen. A group, I think one of them was a couple of years ago now, and we're talking like 9, 10-year-olds. And these kids were, Hector, but the one team beat us 9-1. We barely touched the ball. And it's most people would be devastated. I was just in awe, and I'm like, it was I've never seen a group of kids play like that. It opened my eyes as to what was possible for a 9-year-old. And it was like, wow, that was the happiest I've ever been to lose 9-1. Looking off the field, the kids on that team were miserable.
Yeah.
Not a single smile. Like, we did the whole, the teams line up and you say, good game, good game. And I was just like, wow, man, you kids, like, that was fantastic. And they're all just heads down. Like, there was no joy in that. And I've seen a few teams, and maybe this is something that you're kind of alluding to as well, is fantastic teams, technically brilliant, play the game beautiful, but they look miserable. No, it doesn't look like they got any enjoyment out of it. And then I've played other teams that are absolutely awful, laughing, having fun. And it was almost like you could tell that 9-1 just wasn't going to be good enough for their coach.
Right.
And it made me kind of sad that a group of kids that were that enjoyable to watch, it was like watching a mini Barcelona. It was.
So you were having more fun than they were. Huh? You were having more fun than they were.
Yeah, I just couldn't believe though that the kids just didn't seem to get any joy or fun out of it.
Yeah. And I don't know. I think, excuse me. I think that I just don't think there's escaping that anywhere in our game. Whether I don't know, whether you're talking grassroots, whether you're talking at the earliest of stages, whether you're talking in those transition years, high school, college, because I mean, even in the pros, you see that, right? You see that with teams, these magical teams, these teams that go on the championship run when they have this chemistry with a certain group of players on and off the pitch, the right coach that infuses this energy, right? This level of passion and fun. Yeah, it's measured differently at the pro level. I get it, but still, I mean, you can't escape it. And I think sometimes when you're in this game long enough, and people who, even with the best of intentions, if you lose that piece, I firmly believe there's two things. If I ever lose that piece, that fun / passion piece, and no longer wanting to learn, no longer wanting to be on something like this, be on a podcast like this with a really, really good coach that I highly respect, and we're discussing these things. If I no longer want to have these discussions and learn, those two, that and the fun passion piece, it's time for me to hang them up, because I'm going to be doing a disservice to any kid that I come in contact with in the future, their parents, and then what that ripple effect has. I don't want to be known as the kid that destroyed a kid's passion for the game. That's, to me, that's the biggest insult I could have.
And I think that's one of the reasons why we have this drop off at.
Yeah.
There's many, many reasons why there's drop off at 13, but I think, like you said, maybe some kids I don't think they ever get a passion for the game because they don't get to play it enough.
Right.
in an
Right.
environment where they can enjoy it.
Yeah. 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 That's a good point. That's a very good point.
What are some of the things you're doing to keep it fun for the high school age? Because I think you're right, right? Fun never stops. It changes, right? Like,
Right.
what are some of the things that you do with your teams, Hector, that we can
You
learn?
know, for us, yeah, for us, and obviously every group is different, but I think as a coach, and this is where I think your assistants come in as well, is always being aware of your assistants and your team captains, is always being aware of what's going on with the pulse of the team, right? Because I can have this absolutely, I can be in my office with this absolutely like immaculate training session all ready to go.
Yeah.
And then I step out on the field, and I can just tell during dynamic warm-ups, I can just tell that right now they're not there. Mentally, they're not there. They're somewhere else. They need something. Something's off. Sometimes it's pulling them in, talking to them for a minute, talking to them about stuff that's not soccer. Because once you get to that level, at least high school, same thing, definitely in college as well, and then even at the semi-pro level, when I coached semi-pro level, I noticed that a big chunk, but especially high school and college, a big chunk of the conversations you're having with your players isn't even related to soccer.
Yeah.
It's it's about everything else that's going on in their life. And
I think
just check it.
that's the same. I think all the way down. I know I've definitely found that as I've got older and I've been coaching grassroots longer, my discussions are not so much focused on soccer as they are on Spider-Man, kid who just got his karate black belt, right? It's more about school. It's about all the other things. I find that's a big. I find that's an area that a lot of grassroots coaches could do better, is learning how to talk to 5, 6, 7-year-olds.
Yeah. Coming down, coming down to their level where you're seeing it from their perspective, right? I think
that's why I'm good at grassroots. I don't have to come down any levels. I'm already there.
Yeah. One of the very first things, and it sounds so simple, so obvious, but one of the very first things I learned when I first started, again, this is the same club in Colorado, when I first started kind of diving in and started working with the little ones and I had some great mentors, I had some great coaches. They said, hey, as much as you can, especially in the beginning with a new group, I said, you want to put them at ease and you want to kind of earn their confidence. I said, don't talk to them from a standing position, looking down upon them all the time. Take a knee, put them at ease and just talk to them about anything. And then, when you're talking about whether it be Spider-Man, whatever, Harry Potter, whatever, the association, right, of how whatever you're trying to work on that day in terms of just whatever, a single individual technical skill, some sort of Corver training movement, something. How doing that by association, some way where something that they know well, to where you can use that to help them, to teach them something. And to me it's a blast. And when you see them on their game day, and then when you see them connecting the dots, and these little moments of magic happen, right, where they're all of a sudden they take a player on 1v1 with a less dominant foot, and they don't care, they just go for it even if they lose the ball. I think those, at that level, things like that get me excited, and it's awesome. But more importantly is when you see that smile on their face. That's, to me, that's what it's, it can sound cliche, it can sound corny, but if we're not in it for those reasons, how are we, if we can't build them from the inside out, how are we going to ever make them better, better players, better people, as they get older?
No. So before we wrap up, I want to talk to you a little bit about a few posts, some stuff I've seen. I see you coming into entering the world of podcasting with, I saw, is it the 50/50 podcast that you're going to be starting? Why don't you tell me a little bit about that and what it's all about, what your plans are for it, who's going to be your first guest and who's going to be your last guest?
Well, I hope my first guest isn't also my last guest. I guess I'll say that. Getting ready to launch my very first podcast in about 2.5 weeks or so. It's called the 50/50 podcast, and the emphasis is, so essentially our mantra is covering Texas high school club and college soccer. The college soccer obviously there'll be a focus on Texas college soccer, Texas programs, but obviously it'll have a larger reach. It'll have more of a national reach because I'll be bringing in coaches from across the country to talk and help showcase their programs and talk about their programs for our athletes in the state of Texas. Sometimes so they can also look at
Texas thing.
Yes and no. It'll have a local, state, and ultimately national reach. But yes, in terms of what we're covering initially, yes, Texas high school soccer club and collegiate soccer. But like I said, how'd
you come up with the 50/50 name? What's behind that?
So I kind of lumped, basically, in terms of the coverage, I kind of looked at, even though they are separate entities, but high school club in one and then the college game in the other. So kind of covering in between both, right? And going back and forth. So I don't know, just kind of the genius or lack thereof genius in me, I guess. Somehow I kept coming back to that name for whatever reason. And I kind of liked it. So settled on that. And
what spurred you to do it? Like, is it something you've been thinking about for a while, or you've been on a few and you were like, yeah, I could do that. I could do it better than that guy.
Yeah, once I saw that John Johnson had a podcast, I was like, man.
Listen, I think my grandmother has a podcast. So
let me know. Let me know so I can listen to that one instead of yours, right? Yeah.
I'm still trying to find someone who doesn't have a podcast now.
Yeah. I am kind of curious to see exactly how many active are out there, because what I noticed is when I look through the directories, there's a lot of podcasts that only seem to exist for about 4, 5, 6 episodes and then never again.
I think one of the things, right, Hector, is it's a really simple thing to start. Like, it's not very difficult, right? It's actually pretty simple to get I guarantee most people can get one up and running within a day. I think the problem becomes, as you get into it, is, like you said, can you sustain it? Can you be consistent?
Right.
Like, there's no point doing 6 episodes and then not having an episode for 6 months. It's one of those things you got to look at. It's a long-term project, and the one thing I've found, like, you need a lot of energy to do it. Like, you got to be on your game. Otherwise, don't even bother doing the episodes. There's been a couple of times where I've said to people, like, you know what, I'm just gonna have to postpone today because I'm just not up for it. I'm too tired. Or
right.
Yeah. But yeah, you're probably right. I bet there are. It'd be interesting to see how many. I think there's over. I think I was watching Joe Rogan and he gave the number on how many podcasts, and it was like,
it's over 1 million.
Oh, no, way more. Yeah.
I know it's over 1 million. But I'm kind of curious as to, I wonder, like, that number, is it just kind of all encompassing, or is it just total registered, or is it like, that's why I say the key phrase is active podcasts, right?
Yeah.
Like, that are, consistent, because you hit the nail on the head. There is the tough part. It's like life, right? Like what I ask with my players, I say one of the toughest things to do in life is be consistent. So, but anyway, so we came back to it, settled on that name, the 50/50 podcast. And
I like it.
We have our titles. I was able to acquire a title sponsor, a really good, like-minded organization. Physical.
Please tell me it's Bucky.
No, unfortunately, no. There's no Bucky's. There's no Bucky's in El Paso, man. There's no Bucky's. So, yeah, maybe down the road, right? Down the road. I'd love to have Bucky's. Bucky's, if you're listening, please consider. Again, that's 50/50 podcast. But no, we got a really good organization, a sports performance based organization here, Physical Athletics, which is going to be our title sponsor, and they're trying to do a lot of great things for student athletes here in the local area here in El Paso as well. So we're excited to have them as our title sponsor. And like I said, and the other thing too, John, is that part of the big part of this podcast will also be kind of it'll be a college soccer recruiting platform. So given my background, my experience as a recruiting coordinator and as an assistant coach, having coached at the D1 level, it's going to be kind of a multifaceted, multi-angled podcast where we're also looking at, we're trying to bring in and educate just as much student athletes, but the parents as well, on the daunting, what can be the daunting and overwhelming.
What lies ahead for you?
Yeah. The do's and don'ts, and the just reminding student athletes and parents that it's a college recruiting process. It's not a college recruiting moment, and I think like anything, it can be a grind. It can be overwhelming. So helping educate.
So if you could have, I'm going to put you on the spot here. If you could have any three people on your podcast, who would it be?
Any three? Are we talking soccer people here, or what are we saying here? What's the parameters here?
Whatever would fit for your podcast. Like who would be like the most valuable guests? Anyone from Twitter or anyone you know? If they're on Twitter,
I don't know.
Put them out and tell them to get on the podcast right now.
I think a big part of what we want to do is get people that are going to talk. This is because we're going to look at obviously college coaches, high school coaches, athletic directors, and then DOCs, directors of coaching on the club side. So I don't know. I guess maybe one of them would probably be, I don't know, maybe Christian Lavers over the head of the ECNL. I don't know, maybe you'd look at Leslie Gallimore, who's in charge of the, newly in charge of the new Girls Academy program. Sky Eddie Bruce, who runs the, what is it? I forget the name of the organization, the soccer parenting organization. Yeah. Those are just kind of three off the top of my head that in terms of what, where we're trying to go, what we're trying to do. But yeah, I mean, down the road, hopefully, if any of them are listening, again, don't hesitate to reach out. You can reach us on your social media platforms. On Twitter, we're at 50_50 pod, and then same thing, we're on Instagram at 50_50 podcast. So
I'll
we're excited.
Reach out to you when we publish this. We'll get all that info on the podcast stuff as well, so people can find you. Plans for the weekend?
What's that?
Plans for the weekend?
No, not really. We're kind of sort of in lockdown phase here again, just because our numbers have been surging for a while. So case numbers. So it's been pretty rough. Pretty rough. I have my parents here. My sisters. And we kind of all spent Thanksgiving separately because they're trying to stay home. We're doing everything we can to look after my parents. So quite, honestly, my weekend's going to consist of the labs, being in here in the lab and getting ready for, because on Monday we start our training. Our high school season actually starts on Monday, November 30th. So I got to get got to get things ready. So, but that's
allowed to train at least. You can do some training.
We'll start on December 1st. So Monday, November 30th, we're basically they're all being tested. They're all receiving the COVID tests, and then Tuesday. So we haven't trained at all, right? We haven't trained at all, and we're going to jump right into our placement and selection, essentially our tryouts, right? Over December 1st, December 2nd, and then we'll announce our teams as far as JV and varsity by December 3rd, and then we hit the ground running because we're scrimmaging by December 11th, and then December 12th?
That's an important day, December 11th.
Yeah, and then December 29th, the season begins. So it's absolutely nuts. It's just zero zero preseason, zero, zero preparation. I haven't met a third of my team, so it's interesting.
Hey, everyone will be in the same boat, and I'm sure you'll be prepared, or if not more than anyone else, Hector.
I appreciate that, brother. Thank you. And I will say this before we go. I really sincerely I appreciate being a guest on your podcast. A big fan of what you're doing. I sincerely mean that. I know I give you a lot of grief about count stacking and stuff on Twitter, but no, I love what you're absolutely. I love what you're absolutely.
I'm here to learn too.
Yeah. Hey, you're on the right. We got you going. But I love what you're doing.
Colors first.
Yeah, I love what you're doing. Keep it up, and please know that I know people are noticing, and every chance I get, when it comes to especially Grassroots, I'm plugging in your name. So keep doing what you're doing. Yeah.
Hey, as soon as all this COVID shit's over, I'm gonna try and get down to Texas.
Absolutely, love to have you anytime, man. Anytime.
Hector, have a great weekend, man. Thanks for being on. I appreciate it.
All right.
Take care.
Thank you again.